I sat in my father's office that Friday evening, the smell of oak wood and old paperwork filling my lungs as I watched my parents deliver the news that would change everything. 10 years. 10 years I had given to this company, starting in the warehouse at 18, working my way up through every department, and now they were handing it all to Blake, my older brother who had just returned 2 years ago after failing in California. They looked at me expectantly, waiting for me to protest, to argue. Instead, I nodded slowly and said the words that would haunt them later. I said completely. Before I tell you how this all played out, I want to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe if you have ever felt overlooked by your own family. Because what happened next changed everything, and you will want to hear how the underestimated son built an empire while the golden child crashed and burned. The story begins in a place most people would find unremarkable. A mid-sized industrial equipment manufacturing company in Ohio founded by my father, Richard, back in 1985. Nothing glamorous, nothing that would make headlines, just honest work producing machinery parts for factories and construction companies across the Midwest. But to me it was everything. It represented legacy hard work and the promise that effort would be rewarded. I started working there the summer I turned 18. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to understand the business from the ground up. My father appreciated that, or so I thought. He put me in the warehouse, the hottest, dirtiest job in the building. I loaded trucks in 100-degree heat, unloaded shipments in the freezing January mornings, and learned the inventory system better than anyone in the company. I knew every bolt, every gear, every piece of equipment we produced and where it belonged. By 22, I had moved into sales. I was not a natural salesperson, not the kind who could charm anyone with a smile and a handshake, but I knew the products inside and out. When customers asked technical questions, I had answers. When they needed custom solutions, I could design them. My approach was different, quieter, but it worked. Within a year, I had brought in 3 new accounts worth over $200,000 combined. At 25, my father promoted me to operations manager. This was the job I was born to do. I restructured the workflow, implemented a new inventory tracking system, and streamlined our supplier relationships. Within 6 months, we had increased production efficiency by 30%. Our delivery times improved, our error rate dropped, and our profit margins grew. The numbers did not lie. I was good at this. By 28, I was essentially running the daily operations of the entire company. I managed logistics, maintained relationships with our biggest clients, and oversaw a team of 43 people. My father still made the big strategic decisions, but the day-to-day success of that company rested on my shoulders, and I carried it well. Then there was Blake. 4 years older than me, Blake had always been the golden child, the firstborn son, the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. After college, he moved to California chasing dreams of tech startup success. For 6 years, we barely heard from him except for occasional calls asking for money. He burned through 3 different startups, each one failing more spectacularly than the last. He racked up debt, burned bridges, and finally came crawling home 2 years ago with nothing to show for his adventures except excuses and empty promises. Our mother, Patricia, welcomed him back with open arms. Our father, Richard, ever the softy, when it came to Blake, created a position for him, marketing director, a title that sounded impressive, but meant very little in an industrial equipment company where most of our business came from long-term relationships and word of mouth, not marketing campaigns. Blake knew nothing about our industry, nothing about our products, and showed little interest in learning. But he was home, and that seemed to be enough for our parents. I should have seen the signs earlier. About 2 months before that Friday evening meeting, things started to shift. Blake began appearing in meetings I was not invited to. When I asked my father about it, he would wave his hand dismissively and say they were just family planning sessions, nothing that concerned operations. I found that odd, since operations was literally my responsibility, but I trusted my father. I believed he valued the work I had done. My mother's behavior changed too. Patricia had always been warm with both her sons, but suddenly her conversations were peppered with comments about Blake. How mature he had become. How much he had learned from his failures. How ready he was to take on more responsibility. At first, I thought she was just happy to have him home. It took me too long to realize she was preparing me for something. The most telling sign came from Blake himself. We had always been close growing up despite the age difference, but after he returned, especially in those last 2 months, he became distant. Not hostile, just separate. He walked through the building with a confidence that seemed out of place for someone who barely understood what we did. One afternoon, I passed by our father's office and saw Blake inside standing over the desk examining what looked like an architectural layout of the building. He was pointing at the corner office, the one our father occupied. Our eyes met through the glass and he quickly rolled up the papers. He did not look guilty. He looked entitled. The meeting happened on a Friday evening in late October. My father called me into his office at 6:30 after most of the staff had gone home. The office was exactly as it had been for decades. Dark wood paneling shelves lined with binders and industry manuals, a large oak desk that had belonged to his father before him. The only light came from the desk lamp casting long shadows across the room. My mother was there, sitting in one of the leather chairs that faced the desk. Blake stood beside them, not quite behind them, but not quite with me either. He looked at the floor, at the walls, anywhere but at me. That alone told me this would not be good news. My father cleared his throat. He had never been comfortable with difficult conversations. "Son," he began, and I noticed he called me son, not Justin, as if the formality would soften what was coming. "We need to talk about succession planning, about the future of this company." I nodded, staying quiet, waiting. "You have done incredible work here," he continued. "Your mother and I recognize that. The improvements you have made, the dedication you have shown it, has not gone unnoticed." There it was, the but. I could feel it hanging in the air. But we have to think about tradition, about how things have always been done in this family. The business has always passed to the oldest son. That is how my father did it, and that is how I need to do it. Patricia jumped in her voice, gentle, almost pleading. "You understand right, sweetie. It is not about capability. You are both our sons. We love you both the same. But Blake is the oldest, and some things are just done a certain way." I looked at Blake. He still would not meet my eyes. His jaw was set, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. He knew this was wrong. He had to know. But he was not going to say anything. He was not going to turn down this gift, this company he had contributed nothing to, this legacy I had spent a decade building. Something clicked inside me in that moment. Not anger, exactly. Not even hurt, though that would come later. It was clarity. Crystal clear understanding that no matter what I did, no matter how hard I worked or how much I achieved, I would always be the second son. the backup plan, the one who did the work while the favorite got the glory. I stood up slowly. My father looked almost relieved, probably thinking I was going to storm out, make a scene, give him an excuse to paint me as the emotional, unreasonable one. Instead, I straightened my shoulders and looked him directly in the eye. "Completely," I said, my voice steady. "I understand completely." I shook my father's hand, nodded to my mother, and walked out of that office with my head high. Behind me, I heard my mother exhale with relief. They thought I had accepted defeat. They thought I had recognized my place in the family hierarchy and would fall in line. They had no idea I had just made the most important decision of my life. The following Monday, I showed up to work exactly as I always did. 7:15 in the morning, coffee in hand, ready to tackle the day. Nothing in my demeanor suggested anything had changed. I attended meetings, answered emails, solved problems. To everyone else, it was business as usual. But inside my mind was racing, calculating, planning. Over the next few weeks, I watched Blake begin to act like the boss he had not yet officially become. In meetings, he would interrupt with suggestions that made it clear he did not understand the fundamental mechanics of our business. He proposed switching suppliers to save costs, not realizing those suppliers could not meet our quality standards. He suggested cutting back on equipment maintenance to improve short-term profits, not understanding that deferred maintenance would cost us exponentially more down the line. Each time I would politely explain why his ideas would not work, and he would nod along. But I could see the frustration building in him. He wanted to make his mark to prove he deserved this position, but he did not have the knowledge or experience to do it. The real breaking point came 3 weeks after that Friday evening meeting. My father called an all-hands meeting for the entire company. Everyone gathered in the warehouse floor, 43 employees standing among the equipment and inventory wondering what this was about. Richard stood on a small platform we used for safety demonstrations, Patricia and Blake flanking him on either side. "I want to thank you all for the work you do here," my father began. "This company has been my life for 40 years. And it has been successful because of people like you. But I am getting older, and it is time to start thinking about the future. So, today, I am announcing that my son, Blake, will be taking over as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. I will stay on as chairman, but Blake will be running day-to-day operations going forward." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched faces around the room. Confusion, surprise. Several of the longtime employees glanced at me, questions clear in their eyes. I had been the one they came to with problems. I had been the one who knew every aspect of the operation. And now they were being told that someone who had been there less than 2 years, someone many of them barely knew, would be their boss. Blake stepped forward to speak. He talked about vision and innovation and taking the company to new heights. His speech was full of business school buzzwords, but empty of actual substance. He did not mention a single specific goal or strategy. It was all abstract concepts and vague promises. I stood at the back of the crowd, clapping politely, when he finished, a small smile fixed on my face. After the meeting ended, several employees approached me quietly. Tom, our head machinist who had been with the company for 22 years, pulled me aside. "What the hell is going on, Justin?" he asked, keeping his voice low. "You are the one who keeps this place running." "It is a family decision," I said simply. "Blake is the oldest. That is how these things work sometimes." Tom shook his head. "That is not how good business works." He was right, of course, but it did not matter. The decision was made. That night, I sat alone in my small house, the one I had bought 3 years earlier with my savings. It was not much, just a 2-bedroom ranch on the outskirts of town, but it was mine. I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook and pen, and I started writing. Not angry rants or bitter complaints. I wrote a business plan. I spent the next 2 weeks doing something I had never done before. I allowed myself to imagine. What would I do if I started my own company? What would I do differently? What gaps existed in the market that I could fill? The more I wrote, the more excited I became. I realized that my father's company, while successful, had always focused on large clients. Big construction firms, major manufacturers. They largely ignored the small to medium-sized businesses because the profit margins seemed lower. But there were hundreds of those businesses, and they needed equipment too. They needed someone who would treat them like they mattered, who would give them the same quality service the big companies received. I looked at my finances. I had been frugal my entire adult life, living below my means and saving aggressively. I had $70,000 in savings. It was not enough to start a manufacturing operation, but it was enough to start a distribution and service company. I could buy equipment from manufacturers, provide installation and maintenance services, and build from there. I ran the numbers over and over. It was possible. It would be tight, and it would require me to mortgage my house for additional capital. But it was possible. 3 weeks after the announcement, I met with a business lawyer to make sure I understood my obligations. I had not signed a non-compete agreement, which meant I was legally free to start a competing business. I just had to be careful not to poach clients or employees directly, at least not at first. The lawyer drew up the paperwork for my LLC. I chose the name carefully. Precision Industrial Solutions. Not flashy, but professional. A name that suggested quality and attention to detail. 4 weeks after that Friday meeting, I walked into my father's office and handed him an envelope. He opened it and pulled out a single sheet of paper, my letter of resignation. "What is this?" he asked, genuinely surprised. "My 2 weeks' notice," I said calmly. "I have accepted another opportunity." "Where?" Blake asked from the corner. I had not noticed him there. "I am starting my own company." The room went silent. My father's face cycled through several emotions. Surprise, confusion, and then something that might have been anger. "Your own company," he repeated slowly. "In this industry." "Yes. After everything we have done for you, after we raised you, educated you, gave you a job here." I kept my voice level. "And I have worked hard for 10 years to earn my salary. I believe we are even on that count. This is just business, Dad. Blake has taken the company in his direction, and I am pursuing my own path." Patricia spoke up, her voice tight. "Maybe this is for the best. If you're not happy here, you should find somewhere you will be." I nodded. "I agree." Blake said nothing, but I caught a glimpse of relief on his face. With me gone, there would be no one to contradict his ideas, no one to quietly outshine him by simply doing the job well. I worked those final 2 weeks with the same dedication I had always shown. I documented every process, created transition guides, and made sure that my departure would not harm the employees who depended on the company for their livelihoods. On my last day, I cleaned out my desk, said goodbye to the people I had worked alongside for years, and walked out of that building for the last time as an employee. The next chapter of my life started in a rented garage on the industrial side of town. It was not glamorous. The space was cold in winter, stifling in summer and smelled perpetually of motor oil and rust. But it was mine. I spent the first month setting up. I designed a website myself using online tutorials. I created business cards and brochures. I registered with industry databases and started reaching out to potential suppliers. My first customer came 6 weeks after I opened. A small machine shop owner named Dave who had tried to work with my father's company 2 years earlier, but had been turned away because his order was too small. Minimum orders, they had told him, not worth their time. I drove 3 hours to meet Dave in person, looked at his operation, and understood exactly what he needed. We signed a contract for $25,000. It was not huge, but it was a start. I worked 16-hour days, 7 days a week. I was the salesperson, the installer, the bookkeeper, and the janitor. Every dollar mattered. Every client was precious. I lived on ramen noodles and coffee, pouring everything back into the business. But slowly, steadily, it grew. By the end of the first year, I had revenue of $400,000 and a profit of $60,000. I had hired 2 employees, both of them former colleagues from my father's company, who had reached out to me looking for work. I moved out of the garage and into a small office space with an actual warehouse attached. Year 2 was even better. Revenue hit $1.2 million. I expanded my team to 8 people. I won a contract with a regional manufacturing consortium that wanted someone who could provide personalized service. They had been working with my father's company but were unhappy with the decline in quality under Blake's leadership. I did not have to badmouth my old company. Their work spoke for itself. In the spring of year 2, a local business magazine ran a feature on young entrepreneurs in the region. They interviewed me, took photos of my operation, and published a story titled "Building Something Better: How One Man Turned Rejection into Success." I did not mention my family by name, but anyone who knew the industry could read between the lines. I was not trying to compete with my father's company out of spite. I was building something of my own, something that reflected my values and my vision. But I would be lying if I said there was not satisfaction in proving them wrong. Every new client, every successful project, every employee who chose to work for me instead of them, it all felt like validation. While I was building, Blake was destroying. I did not hear the details at first. I had made a clean break from my family limiting contact to brief polite exchanges on holidays. But in an industry as tight-knit as ours, word travels. And the word was not good. About 10 months after I left, I started hearing things. Tom, my old colleague, called me one evening. "I probably should not be telling you this," he said, "but I thought you should know. Things are getting rough over here." Blake, it turned out, had decided to make his mark by cutting costs. He renegotiated supplier contracts, choosing cheaper vendors who could not match the quality standards we had always maintained. When the first batch of substandard parts arrived, he brushed off concerns from the quality control team. "Good enough," he said. It was never good enough. The first major client we lost was Henderson, manufacturing a company we had worked with for 15 years. They received a shipment of equipment that failed inspection. When they complained, Blake argued with them instead of fixing the problem. They canceled their contract and went with a competitor. That contract had been worth $300,000 annually. Blake's solution was to double down on his cost-cutting measures. He laid off 3 senior employees claiming they were too expensive. These were people with decades of experience, people who knew the business inside and out. Their knowledge walked out the door with them. Then he poured money into a marketing campaign that made no sense, Radio ads and billboards trying to attract customers in an industry where business comes from relationships and reputation, not advertising. By month 18, 2 more major clients had left. The company's revenue had dropped by 40%. Employee morale was in the basement. People were updating their resumes. My father, to his credit, tried to step in, but Blake pushed back. He accused Richard of not trusting him, of undermining his authority. Their relationship grew strained. At month 22, I heard through the grapevine that the company was in serious financial trouble. They had taken out loans to cover operating expenses. They were behind on payments to suppliers. My father had mortgaged his house, the house I grew up in, to keep the business afloat. Patricia was beside herself with worry, and Blake, according to Tom, was a mess. The confident facade had cracked, revealing someone who was in way over his head and did not know how to fix it. I felt conflicted. These were still my parents. Part of me, the part that remembered family dinners and birthday parties, and my father teaching me to ride a bike, that part wanted to help. But another part, the part that remembered sitting in that office, hearing that I would never be good enough because I was born second, that part knew I could not rescue them. They had made their choice. Blake had made his choices. Now they had to live with the consequences. Then, on a Thursday evening in early fall, my phone rang. It was my mother. "Justin, honey." Her voice trembled. "We need to talk." "What is wrong, Mom?" "It is the company. We are in trouble. Real trouble. Blake has been trying so hard, but things are not working out the way we hoped." She paused, and I could hear her fighting tears. "Your father will not admit it, but we might lose everything." I stayed silent, waiting. "I know things ended badly when you left. I know you felt hurt. But we are family, Justin. Family helps each other. Maybe you could come back, work with Blake, help him turn things around." "Mom, I have my own company now." I know. But this is your legacy too. This is your father's life's work. Can you really just stand by and watch it fail?" I told her I would think about it and call her back. I did not sleep that night. The next morning, my father called. His voice was different, older somehow, tired. "Justin, I assume your mother talked to you?" "She did." "I'm not going to beg," he said, and I could hear pride still clinging to his words. "But I am asking for help. We need an investment or a substantial loan to stabilize things. You know this business better than anyone. You could come back, work alongside Blake, help him learn what he needs to know." There it was again. Come back and help Blake. Not come back and take over. Not come back and fix what you know how to fix. Come back and support the son we chose over you. "Let me think about it," I said. "I will get back to you." I spent that entire day thinking. I thought about loyalty and family and obligation. I thought about forgiveness and second chances. I thought about the 10 years I had invested in that company, the relationships I had built, the systems I had created. I thought about my father's pride and my mother's tears and my brother's failures. And then I thought about that Friday evening, sitting in the oak-paneled office, hearing them tell me I would never be good enough. I thought about the word they used, understand, as if it was my job to understand and accept their decision, as if my feelings did not matter as long as I understood the reasoning. The next day, I drove to the bank where my parents had always done their business. I walked in and went to the information desk. "I need some brochures on your business loan products," I said. The representative handed me several glossy pamphlets. information on small business loans, lines of credit, and refinancing options. I also asked for materials on bankruptcy consultation services and business restructuring. She looked at me curiously, but handed them over without question. Back at my office, I found a nice envelope, the kind we used for sending contracts to clients. I arranged the brochures inside neatly. Then I pulled out a piece of my company letterhead and wrote a brief note. I kept it professional, courteous even. Mom and Dad, I have given your request careful consideration. I believe these resources will be helpful for your situation. Best of luck with the business. Justin. I read it over several times. There was no sarcasm, no anger, just facts. These were legitimate resources for businesses in financial difficulty. I sealed the envelope and sent it via certified mail so I would know when they received it. 3 days later, my phone exploded. It was my father, and he was livid. "Is this some kind of joke?" he demanded before I could even say hello. "Not at all," I replied calmly. "Those are legitimate resources for businesses facing financial challenges. I thought they would be useful. After everything we did for you, you send us bankruptcy brochures." I felt something rise in my chest. Not anger exactly, clarity. "After everything you did for me," I repeated, keeping my voice level. "You mean like choosing Blake over me despite 10 years of my dedication, or telling me I would understand why I was not good enough to inherit what I had helped build. I understood, Dad. I understood completely. We gave you opportunities. We raised you. And I worked hard for every dollar you paid me. I earned my place in that company through effort, not birthright. Blake was handed something he did not earn and did not deserve, and now you are dealing with the consequences of that choice. How dare you? I built my own company from nothing," I continued. "I learned that nobody is going to hand me anything just because of my last name. Maybe it is time Blake learned that lesson too. Maybe it is time you learned that your decision had consequences beyond just hurting my feelings." There was silence on the other end. "I hope you figure things out," I said, and I meant it. "But I cannot save you from the choices you made. Nobody saved me, and look how that turned out. I wish you all the best, Dad. I really do." I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaken, but I felt lighter than I had in years. The aftermath unfolded over several months. My father's company did not go bankrupt, but it came close. They ended up selling off a significant portion of the business to a larger competitor just to stay solvent. Blake stepped down as CEO, and Richard came back to run what was left. The company survived, but it was a shadow of what it had been. They went from 43 employees to 19. They lost their building and moved into a smaller space. The family legacy my father had spent 40 years building had been gutted in less than 2 years of Blake's leadership. My company, meanwhile, continued to grow. Year 3 brought revenue of $2 million. I opened a second location in a neighboring state. My team expanded to 22 people, and several of them were former employees from my father's company. They had come to me on their own, asking for jobs after the layoffs. I hired them gladly. They were skilled, experienced, and now they knew the difference between working for someone who valued them and working for someone who saw them as line items on a budget. In month 34, I won my biggest contract yet. A national manufacturing firm with operations across the Midwest chose Precision Industrial Solutions as their preferred equipment supplier. The 3-year contract was worth $4.5 million. The purchasing manager told me they had considered my father's company first out of long-standing relationships, but the quality and service had declined too much. "We need reliability," he said. "You have proven you can deliver that." My relationship with my family remained complicated. I did not cut them off entirely. I sent birthday cards, called on holidays, showed up for the occasional family dinner when my mother insisted. But the dynamic had shifted permanently. My father struggled to look me in the eye. Blake and I were polite, but distant. We never discussed business. We never discussed what had happened. It was a kind of unspoken agreement that some wounds were too deep to examine directly. Patricia tried hardest to bridge the gap. She would call sometimes, her voice small and sad, asking how I was doing. I always answered kindly. I told her about my business, about the employees who depended on me, about the satisfaction of building something from scratch. Sometimes she would cry and say she was sorry. I never asked her to elaborate. I knew what she was sorry for, and I knew that sorry did not change anything. But I also knew she had been caught between her husband's pride and her son's hurt, and that was not an easy place to be. Blake sent me an email once about a year after I sent the brochures. It was awkward and rambling, full of phrases like, "I never meant," and "I did not realize," and "if I could go back." I read it twice, then wrote a brief response. "I appreciate you reaching out. I hope you're doing well. Justin." I did not offer forgiveness or absolution. I did not tell him it was okay, because it was not okay and probably never would be. But I also did not need to carry anger toward him. He had to live with his own failures. That was punishment enough. The real gift in all of this, the thing I did not expect, was the freedom. I had spent 10 years trying to prove myself worthy of something that was never going to be mine. I had tied my identity to their approval, their recognition, their validation. When they took that away, when they made it clear that nothing I did would ever be enough, it forced me to find worth somewhere else, in myself, in my own abilities, and what I could build with my own two hands. I realized that rejection, as painful as it had been, was the best thing that ever happened to me. If I had inherited that company, I would have spent my whole life wondering if I deserved it, wondering if people respected me for my work or just because of my last name. Now I knew. Every success was mine. Every achievement was earned. Nobody could take that away or diminish it by suggesting I only had it because of family connections. Success, I learned, was not about revenue or profit margins or impressive contracts, though those things were nice. Success was about knowing your worth did not depend on anyone else believing in you. It was about building something you could be proud of, something that reflected your values and your vision. It was about waking up every day and knowing you were exactly where you were supposed to be, doing exactly what you were meant to do. I thought about my father sometimes, about the choice he made that evening in his oak-paneled office, about the tradition he valued more than the son who had proven himself. I wondered if he regretted it now, if he lay awake at night thinking about what might have been if he had made a different choice. I hoped he did not. Not out of cruelty, but because I had learned that regret was a prison, and nobody deserved to live locked up like that. Forgiveness was complicated. I had not forgotten what happened. I had not erased the hurt or pretended it did not matter, but I had released the grip it had on me. I had stopped letting their decision define my worth. That was the closest I could come to forgiveness. Not for them, but for myself. Because holding on to that anger, that bitterness, it only hurt me. They had made their choice, and I had made mine. We all had to live with those consequences. Now, at 31 years old, I sat in my own corner office overlooking the city. The office was nothing fancy, but it was mine. On my desk was a framed photograph from my first day in that garage, a reminder of where I started. Next to it was the first contract I ever signed for $25,000 with Dave's Machine Shop. These were my trophies. Not awards or plaques, but evidence that I had built something real from nothing. Sometimes I still thought about that Thursday evening sitting in my father's office while they told me I was not good enough, while they waited for me to understand my place. I remembered the weight in my chest, the sting behind my eyes, the careful control it took to stand up and walk out with dignity. I remembered saying that single word. Completely. I was glad I said it. I was glad I did not argue or beg or try to change their minds, because that moment, as painful as it was, set me free. It forced me to bet on myself when nobody else would, and that bet had paid off in ways I never imagined. To anyone listening who has ever felt overlooked, undervalued, or passed over for something you deserved, I want you to hear this. Their rejection is not your reality. Your worth is not determined by who chooses you. It is determined by what you choose to do next. When someone tells you that you are not good enough, you have two options. You can believe them and shrink into the shape they have created for you. Or you can prove them wrong. I chose to prove them wrong. Not to hurt them or get revenge, but to show myself what I was capable of. And in doing that, I discovered something more valuable than any family business or inherited legacy. I discovered that I did not need their permission to succeed. I did not need their approval to know my worth. I just needed to trust myself enough to try. So, yes, I understood completely. Just not the way they thought. I understood that I was better off building my own empire than inheriting theirs. I understood that being born second did not make me second-rate. I understood that the greatest gift they ever gave me was showing me I did not need them. And if you are in a similar situation right now, feeling rejected or overlooked or told you're not good enough, I hope you understand something too. You are capable of more than you know. The person who cannot see your value is revealing their own limitations, not yours. And sometimes the best thing that can happen is being forced to prove yourself to the only person whose opinion truly matters. Yourself. Have you ever been passed over for an opportunity you deserved? How did you handle it? Drop your story in the comments because I would love to hear how you turned rejection into success. And if this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe so you do not miss future stories about people who refuse to accept the limitations others tried to place on them. Share this with someone who needs to hear that being underestimated is just fuel for the fire. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it reminds you that your worth is not determined by who chooses you, but by what you choose to build. Keep pushing forward. Keep believing in yourself and never let anyone make you feel like second best. You have got this.